right, let's dive in. American culture, huh?
Yeah.
Big topic.
Yeah. You could say that again.
And we've got a ton of your sources here, so
Oh, yeah.
I'm excited to kind of, take a deep dive into all this and
Absolutely.
really get to, I guess, the heart of like what makes American culture tick.
I think what's really interesting about American culture is that it's not this like, static thing, it's not like some museum exhibit. It's really like a living, breathing thing.
Yeah, constantly evolving.
Constantly evolving, changing, adapting.
It's shaped by so many different factors.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Everything from history and immigration to its own internal kind of struggles and debates.
Right, yeah, and speaking of history, I mean, one thing that really struck me from the sources is just how layered it all is. Like, we're not talking about a single American culture, You have to start with, like, that very first layer
Right.
with the Native American cultures that were already here.
The indigenous people, yeah.
And then, bam, European colonization comes in and kind of changes everything.
It's almost like Act One, and then you have all these waves of immigration coming in from all over the globe,
Yeah.
and each group is bringing their own traditions, languages, beliefs, and
Right, it creates that whole melting pot thing.
yeah, you get that melting pot image for sure, but also that tension
Yeah.
between a unified American identity and then celebrating all these individual differences, and I think that's so key to understanding America.
Absolutely. And, it's funny. I'd always thought of the Revolutionary War as like purely political. But the sources really highlight how it kind of gave birth to a whole new American mindset.
It's true. You see it in the way they talk about liberty, self-governance. It's
Right.
like those ideals became, so deeply ingrained in what it means to be American.
And it's almost like, looking back now, it's like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
weren't just documents. They became like cultural cornerstones, right?
They became almost like sacred texts, And this real intense focus on individual rights and freedoms.
Yeah.
You could argue that's one of the most like defining features of the U.S.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to a concept I think everyone's heard of, the American dream.
The American dream, right?
And I'll admit, my initial thought was always like, rags to riches,
Yeah.
becoming a millionaire, that kind of thing.
Whole like bootstrap narrative.
But the sources kind of paint a much more nuanced picture, I guess you would say.
more nuanced. Yeah.
A little bit more complex
Definitely more complex. Yeah.
than just, purely financial success,
I mean, upward mobility, that's definitely a part of it.
right?
But the sources really get at the heart of it. And it's this belief that anyone, no matter where they come from, can achieve success if they just work hard enough, if they have that grit and determination.
That's powerful stuff.
It's powerful, no question. And it's something that's drawn people to America from all over the world, right? The sources also point out that there's a flip side to that.
Right.
That pressure to succeed, that widening gap between the haves and have-nots.
Yeah, it's like this engine driving ambition, but also maybe, kind of masking some of those tougher realities.
Exactly.
Okay. But let's be honest for a second. Sometimes when people think American culture, they're picturing,
Hollywood fast food.
Hollywood fast food, those blockbuster movies.
Yeah.
But thankfully, these sources go way beyond that.
Way beyond that.
Yeah. Really dig deep.
It's easy to get stuck on those, those kind of stereotypical images.
Right.
But when you actually look at it, American culture is wildly diverse,
Absolutely.
Take food, for example. You've got your burgers and hot dogs, sure. But then you've got, New England clam chowder. You've got Southern barbecue.
Yeah, all those regional specialties.
All those regional specialties, each one telling a story about a different part of the country.
Like each region has its own flavor, almost.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can't forget the immigrant cuisines.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, American food is just this tapestry of like a million different culinary traditions. It's amazing.
It's incredible. You see Italian, you see Chinese, you see Mexican influences, so many more.
Right.
All woven into the fabric of American food, And it's constantly evolving, constantly changing as new influences come in.
Always changing. Yeah, it's really cool. Okay, so this next point kind of blew my mind, honestly.
Okay.
The sources highlight this, like contradiction, right? Where American culture is known for being super direct, say what you mean kind of communication style.
Yeah, straight talkers.
But then at the same time, there's this incredible linguistic diversity.
Right.
So like, how does that work?
I think that goes back to that core value of, individual expression that we talked about.
Okay.
Being straightforward, saying what you mean
Yeah.
can be seen as a form of respect, right? You're respecting everyone's right to their opinion.
Okay, that makes sense. And then at the same time, you have this incredible tapestry of languages being spoken all across the country.
Right.
It reflects that ongoing integration of diverse heritages.
Absolutely. So you have this, say what you mean attitude existing alongside, literally hundreds of languages being spoken.
That's America, right?
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of diversity, we can't ignore sports,
Oh, of course not.
especially what I call the big three,
Football, basketball, baseball.
Yeah, those are more than just games in America, right?
Oh, they're way more than just games.
They're woven into the cultural fabric.
Absolutely. They're platforms for community building,
Yeah.
shared national pride, and let's be honest, a huge commercial spectacle.
Oh, yeah. And the Super Bowl is a perfect example of that, right?
The Super Bowl is like Exhibit A.
From the sources. Yeah, it's not just a game. It's this massive cultural event.
It transcends sport, you know? It becomes this shared experience that, for better or worse, brings people together.
Right. But it is interesting to note that, the American sporting landscape is changing.
Oh, for sure. Soccer's getting more and more popular.
Yeah, you've got soccer rising.
And then you've got esports.
Esports, yeah.
So it's a good example of how American culture can adapt and embrace new things.
Absolutely. Constantly evolving.
And speaking of adapting, I mean, there's no denying the global footprint of American culture, right?
That's a big one.
And I know it's something that sparks a lot of debate.
Yeah, it's a loaded topic for sure. I mean, there's no doubt that American culture has had a massive global impact.
Yeah.
You think about Hollywood films, music, fast food chains, those big tech giants. And it's important to, acknowledge the mixed feelings that come with that.
Oh, absolutely.
Some people might see it as cultural dominance, right?
Yeah.
While others might view it as this natural spread of ideas in our interconnected world.
Right.
So it's important to, engage with those complexities and be willing to have those nuanced conversations.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just about McDonald's and blockbuster movies.
Right.
It's about ideas. It's about values.
Absolutely.
And sometimes anxieties.
Oh, yeah. It can be all of those things.
Yeah, it's a big one. And I'm curious, how much of this influence do you think is intentional and how much is just, a byproduct of America's global reach?
That's a great question.
It's a big question.
It is a big question. I mean, the sources do point to those quieter forms of cultural exchange.
Okay.
Like educational exchange programs, work exchange programs, where individuals can actually experience American culture firsthand, and bring those experiences back to their own communities.
It's more subtle.
It is more subtle, but it's still a significant form of cultural exchange.
So we've talked about the history, the values, this crazy diversity. But what about the everyday aspects of American culture?
Oh, the everyday stuff.
What are some of the things that maybe we don't always think about, but that really shape the American experience?
Well, one thing that stood out to me from the sources was this emphasis on community and volunteerism.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's often overlooked, but it's deeply ingrained in American society, I think.
Yeah, and you see it everywhere, right? Local fundraising drives, bake sales, trying to raise money for the school play,
Right.
all the way up to those massive nationwide charitable organizations.
Like the Red Cross, It's
Yeah.
Americans have this inherent desire to step up and help.
Yeah.
Whether it's supporting their neighbors or, contributing to a larger cause.
It's like this cultural code almost, right?
It is. It's like this unspoken rule.
Yeah, look out for each other, give back.
Exactly.
And you see this sense of community really strongly, I think, in how Americans celebrate things, too.
Oh, yeah.
Think about the 4th of July.
Well, 4th of July, yeah.
It's not just a holiday. It's like this chance for communities to come together,
Right.
Celebrate their shared history, their values.
Reaffirm that sense of belonging.
Yeah, that sense of belonging. And then there's Thanksgiving, which is,
Oh, Thanksgiving.
at its core, it's about gratitude. Right?
Yes, yeah.
And sharing a meal with loved ones.
Breaking bread together.
And it's a tradition that's been passed down for generations,
Centuries, really.
And it's fascinating to see how it brings people together from all walks of life.
All walks of life, yeah.
And then you have, Memorial Day, Labor Day, even Halloween.
Right.
They all kind of provide this framework
They do.
for these shared experiences, these traditions that really bind American society together.
They're like cultural touchstones, reminding people of their shared identity, their values.
And on that note, I think it's important to acknowledge that, American culture is also constantly grappling with questions of social justice and equality.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources mention ongoing movements for gender equality, racial justice, LGBTQ plus rights. And all of these have sparked really important conversations about inclusion, fairness, and creating a more just society.
It highlights that dynamic tension within American culture, that push and pull between upholding tradition and striving for progress.
Right.
It's not about pretending everything's perfect. It's about acknowledging the challenges and working towards a better future.
And I think that really ties back to that core American value of, individual rights and freedom.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the right to, speak your mind, but the right to demand justice, the right to advocate for change.
It's about that continuous pursuit of a more perfect union, as the Constitution puts it.
Right.
It takes constant vigilance, open dialogue, a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
It can be messy, it can be complex, but it's also what keeps American culture dynamic and moving forward.
It's like this constant self-reflection
Yeah.
and reevaluation, which can be, uncomfortable sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it ultimately leads to growth and positive change. So we've talked about the history, the values, the global influences, everyday life.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
But I think what's becoming clear is that American culture, it can't be easily defined, right?
Hard to pin down.
It's this fascinating blend of unity and diversity, tradition and innovation, idealism and pragmatism.
Yeah, it's complex.
And what I find so captivating about it is that it's constantly in motion. It's not a fixed point, it's a journey, What we've talked about today is just a snapshot in time.
Right.
American culture is constantly evolving, reshaping itself as new generations come of age and new challenges emerge.
And that's what makes it so interesting to study, right?
Absolutely.
It's not about finding all the answers. It's about engaging with this ongoing dialogue, this push and pull between tradition and progress, individual expression, and the desire for a sense of community.
It's complex, it's multifaceted,
It's fascinating.
fascinating, yeah.
And I think, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, there's one aspect we haven't really touched on yet, and that's this concept of American exceptionalism.
Ah, yes, that intriguing and often debated notion
Yeah?
that the sources don't dwell on it too much.
Right.
But it's worth acknowledging because it has a significant presence in the American cultural narrative.
Absolutely. So, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Sure.
the idea of American exceptionalism is this belief that the United States holds a unique position in the world, right? And it's often tied to its history, its ideals, its global influence.
Right. It's a very powerful concept.
It is.
And I can see how it can be both inspiring and controversial.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like many aspects of American culture, it's multifaceted. Some interpretations focus on those positive aspects,
Right.
highlighting American democracy, its commitment to individual liberty, its role as a global leader.
Yeah.
But then there are those critiques,
Right.
viewing it as a justification for interventionism or a form of cultural superiority.
Right. So it can be seen as both a source of pride and a point of contention, both within the U.S. and on the global stage.
Precisely. It's complex.
It is complex. It's layered.
Yeah.
And I think understanding its presence in that cultural narrative is really essential to fully grasping the nuances of American identity
Absolutely.
and its impact on the world. But I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder for now.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
So what do you say we take a pause here
Okay.
and continue our exploration in the final part of our deep dive?
Sounds good to me. We'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll continue to unravel the intricacies of American culture.
I'm looking forward to it. Picking up where we left off, it's really interesting to think about how American culture has been shaped by global influences too.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It's not just like America's pushing its culture out to the rest of the world.
Right. It's not just a one-way street.
Exactly. There's this constant back and forth.
Yeah.
This kind of dance between American culture and the rest of the world. I like that, a dance.
We often focus on how America influences other cultures, which is a big thing, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But what about all the influences coming in N?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, think about music, for instance.
Oh,
Jazz, blues, rock and roll, these all have deep roots in African American musical traditions, right?
Yeah.
And those traditions themselves drew inspiration from West African rhythms
Right.
and European melodies.
So it's like this fusion.
It is. It's a fusion of different cultures coming together
Yeah.
to create something new and exciting.
And then you think about hip hop,
Oh, absolutely.
which, was born in the Bronx,
Like they're in the Bronx.
and it's become this like global phenomenon.
It really has.
Influencing fashion, language, dance in cultures all over the world.
It's mind-blowing to see how this like distinctly American art form has resonated with so many people.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And it's a prime example of how American culture is constantly absorbing and reinterpreting influences from all over the globe.
Yeah, it's not about imitation. It's like taking those influences and creating something new.
Exactly. Forging something new and uniquely American.
So it's not just a melting pot. It's like more like all these different ingredients coming together
Right.
to make like this complex, flavorful dish.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we've talked about the history, the values, the
Well,
diversity.
it's a lot to cover.
It's a lot. But what about those everyday aspects of American culture?
Yeah, everyday stuff.
What are some of those like less obvious but equally important things that shape the American experience?
Well, one thing that really struck me from the sources was this emphasis on community and volunteerism.
Oh, yeah.
It's often overlooked, I think, but it's like deeply ingrained in American society.
And you see it everywhere.
Right, you really do.
Like from bake sales trying to raise money for the school play.
Right,
To those huge nationwide charitable organizations.
like the Red Cross.
Like Americans have this inherent desire to like step up and help out,
There's a real sense of, giving back.
whether it's supporting your neighbors or, contributing to a larger cause.
Absolutely.
It's like this cultural code almost, right?
Yeah, it's like this unspoken rule.
Look out for each other, give back.
Be a good neighbor. Yeah.
And I think you see that sense of community really strongly in how Americans celebrate things too.
Oh, for sure.
Like think about the 4th of July.
4th of July. Yeah.
It's not just a holiday. It's like this chance for communities to come together,
Right.
celebrate their shared history, their values.
Reaffirm that sense of belonging.
Yeah, that sense of belonging. And then you've got Thanksgiving, which is at its heart, it's about gratitude
It is, yeah.
and sharing a meal with loved ones.
Breaking bread together.
And it's a tradition that's been passed down for generations.
For centuries, really.
It's fascinating to see how it brings people together from all walks of life.
From all different backgrounds, all different beliefs.
And then you've got Memorial Day, Labor Day, even Halloween.
Right.
They all kind of provide this framework,
They do.
for these shared experiences, these traditions that really bind American society together.
They're like cultural touchstones,
Yeah.
reminding people of their shared identity, their values.
Absolutely. And, on that note, I think it's important to acknowledge that American culture is also constantly grappling with questions of social justice and equality.
Oh, of course, yeah.
The sources mention ongoing movements for gender equality, racial justice, LGBTQ plus rights. All of these have sparked like really important conversations
Absolutely.
about inclusion, about fairness,
Right.
and creating a more just society.
Yeah, it highlights that dynamic tension within American culture, this
Yeah.
push and pull between upholding tradition
Yeah.
and striving for progress. It's not about pretending everything's perfect. It's about acknowledging the challenges
Yeah.
and working towards a better future.
And I think that ties back to that core American value of, individual rights and freedoms.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the right to speak your mind. It's about the right to demand justice,
Yes.
the right to advocate for change.
It's about that pursuit of a more perfect union, as they say in the Constitution.
Yeah.
It takes constant vigilance, open dialogue, a willingness to challenge the status quo.
It can be messy, it can be complex,
It can be.
but I think it ultimately leads to growth and positive change.
I agree. Yeah.
So we've looked at history, values, global influences, everyday life.
It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot.
But I think what's becoming clear is that American culture, it can't be easily defined.
It's hard to pin down.
It's this fascinating mix of unity and diversity, tradition and innovation, idealism and pragmatism.
Yeah, it's complex.
And what I find so captivating about it is that it's constantly in motion, It's not a fixed point, it's a journey. What we've talked about today it's just a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
American culture is always evolving, always reshaping itself, you know?
As new generations come of age and new challenges pop up.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it so interesting to study, right?
Absolutely.
It's not about finding all the answers. It's about engaging in this ongoing dialogue, this push and pull between tradition and progress, individual expression, and, you know, that desire for a sense of community.
It's complex, multifaceted.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Now, before we jump into the last part of our deep dive,
Okay.
there's one thing we haven't really talked about yet, and that's this concept of American exceptionalism.
Ah, yes. American exceptionalism, that often debated notion.
Yeah.
You know, the sources don't spend a ton of time on it.
Right.
But it's definitely worth mentioning because it's a big part of the American cultural narrative.
It is.
So my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but the idea of American exceptionalism is this belief that the United States holds like this unique position in the world. And it's often linked to its history, its ideals, its global influence.
Okay.
It's a powerful concept, you know,
That's it.
and it can be both inspiring and controversial.
Absolutely, yeah.
And like a lot of things about American culture, it's multifaceted, right?
Yeah.
Some people focus on the positive aspects,
Like what?
like highlighting American democracy, its commitment to individual liberty, its role as, you know, a global leader.
Okay.
But then you've got those who critique it,
Right.
viewing it as a justification for, you know, intervening in other countries' affairs,
Right.
or even a form of like cultural superiority.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it can be seen as both a source of pride and a point of contention, both within the US and globally.
It's complex.
It is complex. It's layered.
Yeah.
And I think understanding its presence in the cultural narrative is really essential to fully grasping those nuances of American identity
Absolutely.
and how it impacts the world. But I think we've given our listener plenty to think about for now.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
So, what do you say we take a break here
Okay, sounds good.
and continue our exploration in the final part of our deep dive?
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we're back. And I got to say, even after all that, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
It's true.
American culture is just,
There's just so much to it.
yeah, so vast, so complex.
It really is like an onion, you know?
Oh, I like that.
You peel back one layer and
Yeah.
there's always another one underneath,
Yeah.
you know? More nuances to discover.
Always something deeper.
And that's what makes it so interesting to explore.
It does. It really does. Speaking of layers, I wanted to touch on something we talked about before.
Okay.
That whole idea of American culture having this global reach
Right?
and, you know, the mixed feelings that come with that.
The sources definitely don't shy away from that.
No, they don't.
It's complex.
It is.
There's that fine line between cultural exchange and what some might see as cultural dominance.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure.
It is.
And it's important to remember that, like, American culture isn't this monolithic thing, you know,
Right.
that's being forced on the rest of the world.
It's not like some, you know, cookie cutter stamping out the same thing everywhere.
Exactly. It's dynamic. It's constantly evolving. It's this blend of, like, a million different influences.
And so its impact on a global scale.
Yeah.
It's going to be multifaceted, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation.
No, absolutely not. And it's not just about, like, you know, the obvious stuff,
Right.
like McDonald's and Hollywood movies.
Although those are definitely part of the picture.
Yeah, for sure. But it's also about ideas.
Values, anxieties even.
Yeah, totally.
It's a lot more than just products.
Think about the American dream, for example.
Oh, yeah. Good one.
Like, that concept has been both inspiring and, you know, kind of controversial around the world. On one hand, you know, it represents hope, it represents opportunity, but it can also, you know, create these unrealistic expectations.
Fuel a sense of inadequacy even.
Exactly.
It's a powerful reminder that, you know, cultural influence is rarely neutral.
Right.
It comes with both promises and potential pitfalls.
And it's important to acknowledge both sides of that.
Absolutely.
Recognize the good, but also be aware of, you know,
The potential downside.
the potential downsides.
But be willing to have those critical conversations.
Yeah, and I think even more importantly, remembering that, you know, cultures don't exist in isolation.
Oh, totally.
They're constantly interacting, influencing each other.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah, it's not just America influencing the rest of the world.
American culture is just as much shaped by global trends.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, think about music, fashion, food, all areas where American culture is constantly, like, pulling inspiration from other parts of the world,
Taking those influences, reinterpreting them,
creating something new.
creating something uniquely American.
It's like this cycle of
Cross-pollination.
cross-pollination innovation
Global conversation, really.
where everyone's like contributing and learning.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important takeaway?
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is tough. There's so much.
But if I had to boil it down, I'd say American culture is a paradox.
Okay.
It's this blend of unity and diversity, tradition and innovation, idealism and pragmatism.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving, grappling with its own contradictions,
Always changing
and reshaping itself.
in response to everything.
Exactly. Both internal and external forces.
So it's deeply rooted in history, but also always looking ahead, embracing individual expression, but also seeking that sense of shared identity.
And it's both influential and influenced,
Yeah.
shaping the world, but also being shaped by it.
And maybe most importantly, it defies easy definition. It's complex, it's messy, it's full of contradictions.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
It really is.
Endlessly intriguing.
Well said. So, to our listener out there, as we leave you to ponder all of this, we have a little challenge for you.
Oh, I like this.
As American culture keeps evolving in the 21st century,
Yeah.
how will it navigate all these complexities? Globalization, technological advancements, social change.
It's a lot to navigate.
It is.
How will it balance that need for unity
Yeah.
with the desire for individual expression?
And how will it continue to shape and be shaped by the world around it?
These are the questions,
It's a big question.
The ones that'll be debated and explored for generations to come.
And I think that's what makes it so captivating, right?
Absolutely.
It's not about finding all the answers.
It's about the journey.
It's about engaging in that ongoing conversation,
Embracing the complexities.
appreciating that it's always evolving.
American culture is a living, breathing thing.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into American culture.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, keep exploring.
Keep learning.